Welcome to Bloomberg Law. I'm Pacchia. At the Republican National Convention in Minnesota in 2008, Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now!, and two of her colleagues were arrested. Earlier this month, it was announced that Goodman's lawsuit had been settled. Joining me now to discuss is Amy Goodman and her attorney, Steve Reiss, from the law firm Weil Gotshal Manges. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks so much.
So let's channel law school here briefly. Tell us what happened. What are the facts in this case?
So it was September 1st, the first day of the Republican convention. The convention was beginning at night at the Excel Center, and in the morning, massive protest outside, just like there was at the Democratic convention the week before in Denver. Anti-war protests, 10,000 people marched, led by soldiers, some in uniforms,
These protests
some
are almost
resisting
becoming
war.
routine now. They
Right.
appear at almost every convention.
Think of 2008 for the Republicans and Democrats in the middle of two wars. So we were covering that protest. Then I went to the convention floor to cover delegates from the hottest state, from Alaska. And my colleagues went off to digitize tape at the TV studio, and they heard a commotion outside. My colleagues, Sharif Abdel-Quddus and Nicole Salazar, so they went downstairs. I didn't know about this. I was on the convention floor. I got a call from our senior producer, said, come quickly to 7th and Jackson in St. Paul. Nicole and Sharif have been arrested, and they've been bloodied by the police. I was completely shocked.
And you guys had press passes. You have reason to be there.
Security press. I'm on the floor of the convention. I can interview presidents and vice presidents and delegates, as can they. So we race off the floor of the convention, me and my cameraman, and we are going down the streets of St. Paul. We get to the corner, 7th and Jackson. The riot police have fully contained the area, so I run up alongside to ask a police officer, which I did. I stopped and I said, I need to speak to your commanding officer. I've just come from the convention. They could see my credentials around my neck. And my colleagues are credentialed like I am, two reporters inside that you've arrested. We need to have them released now. It wasn't seconds before the police officer ripped me through the police line, twisted my arms back, slapped the handcuffs on, pushed me up against a car and then the wall and then onto the ground. And they charged me with a misdemeanor, interfering with a peace officer.
And your producers were charged with felonies.
Yeah, I didn't even know where they were at that point. I was on the ground. I was saying, please don't arrest me. You can see I'm a reporter. I'm seeing Sharif across the parking lot demand to be brought to him. We're both standing. We're saying, release us now, or you could see our credentials. Whereupon the Secret Service came over and ripped the credentials from around our necks. So I'm taken off to the police garage where they've erected cages for the protesters. Sharif and Nicole are taken off to jail. Nicole in the police van, whose face is bloodied, Sharif's arm was bloodied, tells me quickly what happened. She said they ran downstairs when they heard a commotion, camera and microphone. They're filming as the riot police come at her. She didn't plan to film her own violent arrest. The riot police are screaming at her, on your face, on your face. She's filming, and you can hear this on the videotape. And she's holding up her press pass, filming at the same time and shouting, press, press. And they take her down on her face. They're dragging her by her leg, knee or boot in her back, so they're bloodying her face. Sharif tells them to calm down. They're the only ones there in this area. So this is not in the midst of any kind of calamitous situation. They're alone there. And he tells the police to calm down. They throw him up against the wall, kick him twice in the chest, and take him down. And they faced felony riot charges. That's how serious this was. And we were only 3 among more than 40 reporters who were arrested that week at the Republican convention.
And if our viewers want to see the arrests being made, those videos are on YouTube.
Yes. The 2 video of my arrest and Nicole's became the most watched YouTube video, went viral the first 2 days of the Republican convention. It's what got us out of jail that day. We were in jail for a few hours, and because of the massive grassroots response to the authorities in St. Paul and Minneapolis, more than 10,000 people, tweeted, emailed, called in, faxed in, whatever. We were ultimately released. But it is unacceptable that we should have to get a record when we put things on the record. And the next day when I went to the police chief's news conference and he was talking about what a good operation they had, I said, Chief Harrington, I described what happened to Nicole, Sharif, and me, and I said, what have you instructed your police to do, and how do you expect us to operate in this environment? And he said we could embed in the mobile field force. And next day I see a Fox reporter in the middle of a mobile unit as they're moving like an organism down the street. You know, I think the embedding process, like reporters embedded in the front lines of troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, has brought the media to an all-time low. Because you're only getting reporting from one perspective, from the trigger end. And our responsibility is to be outside. And the idea that that is now being imported back to the United States for how we as reporters cover American cities is not acceptable.
Interesting. Steve, bring us up to speed here. How did you get involved, and how did Weil Gotshal come to work on this case?
Well, we got involved through CCR, the Center for Constitutional Rights. I think they viewed this as a potentially groundbreaking case, and they think they came to us to ask for some additional legal firepower, and given the principles at stake, we were only too happy to do that. So we did the case together with the Center for Constitutional Rights.
Now, most of our viewers are going to be familiar with the theory behind freedom of the press. That's kind of a foundational part of our democracy. Bring us through some of the legal nuance here. What does this case look like?
Well, the critical thing was that you had reporters being improperly arrested for covering certain events that ostensibly the authorities didn't want them to cover, like the demonstrations outside the convention. The arrests themselves were unlawful because there was no basis for the arrest. There was no probable cause, no legal basis for the arrest. So in constitutional terms, that was a Fourth Amendment problem. But more important was the First Amendment right of journalists to cover the news. You can't get news if journalists aren't free to cover it, and journalists are expressly protected. Their right to cover events like this is expressly protected by the First Amendment. So the lawsuit claimed a violation of the First Amendment rights of Amy and her producers, as well as unlawful arrest under the Fourth Amendment.
And we have a settlement here. Tell me about the settlement.
We do, and the settlement is actually quite important because there are two components to it. One is a monetary component, and the three plaintiffs got a total of $100,000. Now, in the realm of settlements and cases in Minnesota for police misconduct, we are told that is an almost record settlement. 6 figures where there is no lasting or permanent injury is considered quite a high monetary award. But more importantly than that, there is a part of the settlement under which the police departments agree to formulate programs to train officers with respect to reporters' rights, especially in demonstration situations, and they've got to report back to the judge on their formulation of this program. Groups like the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press, the ACLU, are going to have input into that training program, and the judge has to approve it. That's the first time, to my knowledge, that police departments are under a federal order to formulate programs to train their officers with respect to the First Amendment rights of reporters. This program is going to be made available to all police officers in Minnesota. That is groundbreaking.
Amy, is this settlement going to disincentivize police departments around the country from taking actions like they did in 2008?
Well, we absolutely hope so. In fact, we held a news conference announcing this landmark settlement at the Occupy Wall Street encampment downtown New York. We hope it sends a very strong message to police as they deal with the Occupy encampments, and also as we move into the Democratic and Republican conventions in both Charlotte and Tampa, that this is not only a violation of freedom of the press, it's a violation of the public's right to know. Because when reporters feel intimidated, when the environment is chilled and they can't get any information, people can't make informed decisions. That's why we feel this is so critical. And we hope it sends a very strong message to the police all over this country, especially now when we're seeing over 2,500 arrests at these encampments, with reporters being told to turn off their video cameras. That's exactly when they should be turning them on.
That's exactly where I want to go next. I'm glad you brought up the Occupy movement. We're living in a time where, suffice to say, we're going to be seeing a lot more in terms of social activism and protest around this country. The Occupy Wall Street movement has just completely exploded over the last 5 or 6 weeks. What are you seeing on the ground? Are journalists allowed to cover and being given access to do their job on the street?
Well, you know, at Democracy Now! NewsHour, and people can check it out, democracynow.org, we are covering this every single day and bringing out voices of people at the grassroots. We are seeing over and over, with 2,500 arrests, one of the largest single mass arrests in U.S. history, 700 people on the Brooklyn Bridge. The pepper spraying of these young women, being totally blindsided, not giving any warning, there was no provocation. And reporters, like a reporter at the New York Times, on the bridge, and suddenly she's arrested. This is extremely serious, and police must be put on notice. You know, the good cops care about this, and it's as important for them because we as observers, we as journalists, we have a special job. It's to hold those in power accountable. We are not there for the state. We are the fourth estate. We are not there to cover for power, but to cover power. And to cover the movements that create static and make history. And we got to get out there on the front line, and we cannot be inhibited from doing that.
Steve, when you look at this case, when you could take a step back for a moment, what do you think happened here? Was this just a bad snap decision made by a couple police officers, or was there any explanation for what happened?
Well, certainly I think with respect to the arrest of Amy, that was a completely misreaction. It was a bad reaction. It was an overreaction. But, we've got 4 different arrests here. We've got Amy was arrested, her 2 producers were arrested, and one of her producers was arrested a second time. So when you've got 4 arrests, and by the way, they weren't the only reporters arrested. There were some 40-odd reporters also arrested.
Did other journalists sue as a result of being arrested?
No, and that's why this was so important. It's real.
Why didn't they?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not sure. It may well be that a lot of them were local journalists who didn't want to get into a tussle with the local police who they have to deal with and rely on.
They have special relationships, and we have to challenge this kind of violation of freedom of the press. It's not easy to do this because we have to move on. This is 3 years later when this is settled. Very tough to do it, and people have jobs to do, as we do. But we felt this principle was so critical. Dissent is what this country was founded on, and we have to be able to cover it wherever it is, on the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul or in New York. Democracy is a messy thing, and it's our job to capture it all.
Sure. It's interesting to look at the numbers here. When we were researching this story, while rare, it's not unheard of for journalists to be arrested. This wasn't the only time it's happened in our history. That said, are either of you of the opinion that we need additional protections, new legislation, new laws to cover journalists in the field?
Well, look, I think it's hard to legislate specific protections when it comes to police activity. I do think what we need is exactly what we hope we'll get as a result of this case in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, which are police procedures where internally they recognize the need to recognize and respect these rights and act accordingly. I have confidence in those police departments because I think they're going to act responsibly. Responsible police departments don't want to inhibit reporters, but the key is making sure the line officers are trained and get that training. The other key is having journalists like Amy who are willing to do, as you point out, sue to vindicate their rights where they're violated, because it's hard to file a lawsuit. It takes time, takes energy. You're subjected to a legal process and go on for a long time. But unless you've got reporters willing to do it, those rights can get trampled on.
And to say the least, it's a very traumatic experience. I mean, Nicole was taken down by riot police. They came at her from behind and in front of her, and they slammed her down on her face. To have to relive this, these are serious issues. But if we don't take this to a new level, as we have, this lawsuit and this landmark settlement, it's going to keep happening to people. The last night of the convention, when McCain was speaking inside the Excel Center, when Sharif was arrested once again covering a protest on a bridge, the image of all of these reporters, they actually separated out the reporters, a lot of the local reporters in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they put them on the median. And the police chief came down to personally oversee their arrests. The image of all these handcuffed reporters. When you handcuff journalists, you're handcuffing democracy.
Amazing stuff. Amy, Steve, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! And Steve Reiss from the law firm Weil Gotshal Manges. If you'd like to learn more about the issues we just discussed, go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.